Today, we're going to be taking a look at Ascend's read and write connections. Connections in Ascend are a way to connect data sources and then reuse that connection across multiple read and write connectors. So for our example today, we're going to be connecting to an Amazon S3 bucket and then creating write connectors and read connectors from that connection. So let's take a look at our sample data flow here. What we're doing is that we have a read connector that's reading in gab write data from an S3 bucket and then passing it along to these two transforms, which are just splitting up the data into valid data and invalid data. So now that we've transformed the data, we're going to have to put it somewhere. This is where our write connector comes in. So there are two ways that we can create a write connector for a component. The first way is to click these three dots and just click on create new write connector. Another way we can do it is on the left here, just clicking write connector. Once we do that, we can see a list of already established connections that exist within our data service. So we see some S3 connections, we see a Google BigQuery connection, a Kinesis data stream connection. But for our case, we're going to create a new connection. We're going to go ahead and pick S3. We can specify the access type. So if we want it to be read-only or write-only connection, we can do that. But we want to read and write from this S3 bucket, so we are going to pick read-write. We're going to give this a connection name of my S3 connection, and then specify the bucket. So we're going to be using the Ascend taxi cab data bucket. So if you have a special type of bucket, you have a private link or a custom endpoint, you can specify that here, but we just have a standard bucket and we're going to use that. Since this isn't a publicly accessible bucket, we are going to have to provide credentials. So we can either go ahead and create new credentials, or we can just use these existing credentials that we have. All right. So then we can go ahead and test this connection. All right, everything looks good. So we can go ahead and create this connection now, and then use it to create a write connector. So our first write connector is going to be for our valid cabs. So we're going to create a valid cab data S3 connector. We're going to select the upstream to be valid cab rides. And then we can go ahead and pick an output directory within the bucket where we want this data to sit. We can select the format to be a CSV. And then we can also make sure that we specify that we have a header row in our data. And any other configurations that we want to add about our CSV, we can do that here. All right, we want to make sure that our component is running. And let's go ahead and create this component. So while that's running and creating, we can go ahead and do something similar for the invalid cab rides. So in this case, we're going to create a write connector. We already have a connection set up, so we can just use that. We're going to give this the name invalid cab data S3. Similarly, add an upstream component and then also add an output directory. We want to specify the format again and configure it as needed. In this case, we're just going to make sure we bring in that header row, make sure it's running, and go ahead and create. All right, so while we were working on that, it looks like our valid cab data S3 component came up to date, which means that the data from this is now sitting in S3. So we're just going to wait on the invalid cab data to go. And it looks like that's up to date as well. So one last thing is that we have created write connectors from this connection, but as we mentioned, since the connection is a read-write connection, we can go ahead and create a read connector from that as well and pick up data from that bucket. So let's go ahead and create a read connector. We have a connection here. Let's use it. All right, and then we see all of the subdirectories within that bucket. Let's go ahead and look at the green cap data. We're going to pick up any one of these CSVs. Let's go ahead and select this one. We're going to give the connector the name green cab data. All right, and Ascend already filled out this information for us based on what we had picked. So we're just going to specify a CSV parser, put a comma as a field delimiter. This also has header rows, so we want to be able to specify that. And let's go ahead and generate the schema. All right, it looks like our schema and our data has been pulled in, and we can take a quick preview of our data to make sure everything's okay. Everything looks good to us. So let's set the refresh schedule to be hourly, and then make sure our component's running and go ahead and create that component. All right. So today we covered just how connections work in Ascend, and with the connection, we can both create a read and a write connector. Actually, if we wanted to go ahead and take a look at the connection itself, we can see that any connector we made for the specific connection is listed here. And we can see our invalid cap data, our valid cap data, and the green cap data read connector we just created. All right, it looks like all of our connectors are up to date. With that, I hope you got a better understanding of how connections work in Ascend and how you can use them with read and write connectors alike. Thank you so much for watching.